You've been listening to Just a Cup on Bleav. Hey, if you like the show, subscribe, like, share, comment on it. We'd love to continue to grow, having some great guests. My guest today, Professor Adam Nicholls from over in the UK at the University of Hull, talking about the psychological aspects of athletes and coaches and getting a real deep dive, with the Olympics that just came up. Simone Biles has been a massive proponent of her kind of flipping the script from Tokyo, where, had what most would say was disastrous. And at the time, a lot of people said she choked and she didn't have the toughness for it or whatever it might be. And then she turns around and, solidifies her title in most people's minds is the GOAT of gymnastics. Adam, as you look at Simone as a case per se, what do you think? I mean, that transition from, getting the criticism that, it was brutal for her, to now she's getting all this praise. What would that be like as an athlete?
Yeah,
that kind of roller coaster.
Yeah, I think social media and navigating social media as an athlete, it must be horrendous. It must be so difficult to kind of navigate the negative criticism that they receive. And I think this is when it's really important that you have a close network around you that you can support you, and that you trust and you believe in and you listen to. I think it's something that is only going to get worse, this social media, the criticism that athletes get and the impact it can have. There was an interview with a British diver, and he was saying he won a silver medal. I can't remember what his name was, a British diver. One negative criticism could affect him for a whole week or 2 weeks. One comment. And if people are if people are reading comments, it's not just it could be commentators saying things. And I understand they have a job to do, but the impact it can have is, as a psychologist, I find it quite worrying, really, the impact it can have on the mental health of athletes.
Well, because you can't really get away from it, because the athletes nowadays, they make so much of their income off of their brand, their image on social media. So it's not like you can say, you know what, I'm going to stop on TikTok or Instagram or whatever, because if you do, you're losing money, because these aren't most of the Olympic athletes per se. The NBA guys, the Premier League guys, they're getting their contracts from their teams. They don't have to be in as much, but the gymnasts, the swimmers, the divers, the persona, the young lady, Elena Mayer, the rugby player for the U.S., she got like 2 million followers during the Olympics because of her social profile. In the comments, I can't imagine how brutal some of them are, just because people are rude.
Yeah, it's like you say, they can't switch off. And when you hear about athletes saying, I do look at the comments, and the negative comments do impact me. And it's difficult, and I think in this way, and I think this will probably be a role for psychologists now and moving forward much more, will be helping them to develop coping strategies to limit the impact of these negative comments. But just going back, I think I don't know much about Simone Biles, but I've read a little bit about how she spent a lot of time in the last 3 years working on different psychological tools. And at the Olympics, you can see her before one of her routines engaging in self-talk, and there's a great picture of her meditating before an event as well. So I think it's great that she's been taught these different psychological tools and put them to great effect during the Olympics.
What are your most effective strategies that you would give to an athlete, give to a coach, to kind of work on the mental side?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in what is known as coping effectiveness training, and I've tested this with Premier League academy players, and essentially it's kind of a 6 to 7 week training program about understanding stress, understanding the impact it can have on you, how you react to it personally, but then equally then about how you can manage that and how you, and then the key premise of this in a short time is about how you match the coping strategy to the type of stressor. So if it's a stressor that you can't control, so for example, you can't control the weather, what your opponents might do, what the coaches might say about you, you would engage in coping strategies to regulate your emotions. Whereas if you can control the stressor, so it might be your lack of your performance, your conditioning, your sleep, you would engage in strategies to help that. So speaking to a strength and conditioning coach, time management strategies. It also involves evaluating how you appraise stress, so you learn to evaluate it as a challenge rather than a threat. And then finally, it's about how you engage your social network more appropriately. So this is a whistle-stop tour of coping effectiveness training, but yeah, I'm a big advocate of this. I think, and I've seen it so many times with athletes that I've worked with, the impact it can have, not just in sport, but also outside of sport. So athletes use this way of coping, in their education, in their work life, in relationships, etc. But I think the crucial bit is understanding why you're experiencing stress, and then moving on from there. Because all athletes experience stress, no matter what they might say and how they might appear. I learned this early on as a new researcher, and I did some study with. They ended up being full Irish international rugby union players playing in the European Premier League competition, and you'd look at them and you'd think, he's the hardest player on the team. He's a tough player. And then I'd then read their diaries the following week about what they were experiencing during that match, and you wouldn't, from watching them particular players play, you wouldn't kind of put their emotions and their feelings to that particular player. And I think, so understanding is crucial.
Do you think that athletes still have the stigma of seeing somebody about the mental side as being a negative?
I do, yes, and I think this comes from the coaches, and I think because what will happen is a coach might think, right, the coach will say, right, you're struggling with this, go and see a sports psychologist. So it's automatically seen as a negative. You go to see the psychologist when they perceive that you're struggling, as opposed to the start of the season. Right, let's work on our mental side. Let's make it better. We all of us will go and see a sports psychologist at some point to work and develop, and that kind of like akin to the performance profiling is, and it's seen as something that's positive rather than negative. So, for example, with strength and conditioning, everyone does strength and conditioning, even if you're very, very good at it.
Absolutely.
And it's not seen as a negative to go and do that. Whereas with the psychologist, it sometimes can be in certain environments, I think.
That's a great way to put it. It's a very simple way to put it, that seeing a strength and conditioning coach is a given. Like you're going to do that whether you're good at it or not, because it's perceived to be better. Seeing a sports psychologist, somebody help you with the mental side, is looked on as, well, you're only going to do that if you're not very good, which is, I guess I never really put it in that context before comparing the two, which to me is unbelievably helpful.
Yeah, and I see that quite a bit. I'll see elite athletes and they'll say, I've never, not all, but some will say, I've never really needed a sports psychologist. Well, yeah, but just think you might have been able to perform much better if you hadn't done, or there might be certain things you could have worked on to develop. So,
one of the fascinating topics that you talk a lot about is the doping effect with athletes. I mean, doping has been around for every in a day, but the psychological reasons why somebody dopes to get that performance edge. Let's talk a little bit about that, because that's a fascinating subject. I know you cover a lot and have done a lot of research on, but really the mental side of doping.
Yeah, this is something I'm really, really passionate about, and you hear the argument, oh well, why not let everybody dope? Well, we can't do that for a number of reasons. Sport should be seen as being clean and fair, but also as well it's about the dangers of doing it, and this leads into a lot of the reasons why people do it in terms of their attitudes towards it and the benefits that they see from doping. Dwayne Chambers, the former British sprinter, he thought, he was under pressure, and he knew that if he maintains his performances or improves, he'll get better sponsorship deals, he'll win more prize money, get more famous. And a lot of times athletes are, and also some coaches are, that they focus too much, or they focus exclusively on the benefits of taking performance enhancing drugs, and give little thought to the potential, the definite side effects of taking it. And the reason why it's so dangerous is that these drugs are often taken at doses that are much higher than what they're ever prescribed for. And that's even if you are taking what you think you're taking. A lot of the times they're bought on the black market, and the contents are not what they're supposed to be. So one thing that we're trying to do, and I received some funding from the International Olympic Committee, and we developed a program called I Play Clean, which is about educating young athletes on a talent pathway about doping, not just the dangers of it, but more about developing ways in which they can use other strategies, so they don't need to dope to enhance their performance. So coping strategies. It's something that I'm really, really passionate about. Really.
Well, I mean, it seemed like, to me, like back in the 80s and early 90s, it was on like a high rise. Like there was a lot of it being done, but they were way ahead of the testing. So you just assumed that so-and-so is doing stuff. And there were some instances, the Ben Johnson situation was huge. But then when you go back and look, it was the dirtiest race in, history, as they say, because 6 out of the 8 guys had sometime tested. Well, were they doing it then? Were they doing it later? So you have all that kind of, and then it kind of like died off for a little bit, but then that whole Balco scandal like ramped it back up. And it's one of those things, are we in this lull where people think that there's not much doping going on, but there actually is? It's just way ahead of the testing.
Yeah, I think, there was a study published in 2018 where I think it's something ridiculous, like 54%, it was either 54 or 47% of athletes and these were elite athletes competing at World Athletics Championships, had admitted a doping offence within the previous 12 months. That's not to say that they're regular users, but they'd engaged in some form of doping offence. So that might be having an infusion, because having an infusion of more than 150 mils under 6 hours is classed as a doping offence. So I think they're always. Are they ahead of the testers? I think the testers are pretty good in terms of what they can detect, but it's like when you get tested, how frequently getting tested, how long the drugs stay in your system. I think there'll always be people be always wanting to cheat and willing to cheat, and will be supported by different people to cheat. And I think sometimes maybe their education is pretty advanced in terms of what they think they can get away with.
It's a fascinating. It's just a fascinating topic to me to know, because I've known people on both sides. I've known people that have tested positive that they swear they'd never tried it, or done it or didn't know about it. And there's some that I completely believe. There's some that I completely believe is bull whatever. But then I also know individuals that did it and stated the same things you just said, that they did it because of finances. Like, hey, if everybody else was doing it, if I want to keep that money, if I want to keep the sponsorship, I've got to do it. And then there's some that I know that just egotistical, and they just wanted to win. They wanted to be better. They could have cared less about anything else.
And that's interesting, I think, as well, is this everyone else is doing it, so I'll do it. I train and compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is absolutely rife. The top stars admit to it. You know, there was Craig Jones this week's got his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Invitational competition where the winner of each bracket will win $1 million. He was on a podcast the other week talking about his stack, what he does. It's, to me, I think it's so wrong, because the influence he will have on 16, 17, 18-year-olds who are training in the sport, I think, well, if he's doing it, I'll do it. Or if he needs to do it, then I'll need to do it. I can't get anywhere without doing it in this sport. And that's where it's wrong. And it's all right. You know, I'm sure he'll be working with, you know, doctors who will be monitoring his blood tests and ensure that he's doing it as safely as he can. And the dangers is when you get the youngsters who don't do that. They'll go and buy something from the internet, the dark web, and they just, you know, and it's just so dangerous. And I find it's upsetting, really upsets me.